So welcome to the podcast studio, TJ Westphal.
Thanks for having me.
Really honored and privileged. Been following your podcast, the Slog Co, Slog.co. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, so it's kind of confusing, but our main brand is the Slog Co, and the Slog Pod, which is our podcast, is part of that larger brand.
Well, the podcast is alive and well. Season 2. I've watched most of them, not all of them. And, after watching them, after a couple coffees with you, I'm like, this is a guy I have to have on the podcast. So welcome.
Oh, I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. Man Uprising is my passion project, and I'm really moving all my work underneath it. I still have 360 Consulting, but I'm bringing guys into Man Uprising and the podcast because at least the men I'm meeting, maybe it's true with all men, but the men I'm meeting they're asking a lot from life, and they're interesting guys who have had all unique journeys. And, listening to your journey a little bit is definitely unique. You didn't probably see yourself podcasting a few years back, right? I imagine it was a different world for you then.
No, I was very much involved in trying to, establish myself in the professional world, build a career.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big part of my identity at the time. And something just kind of woke me up recently that I was like, I'm approaching the midway point, or maybe even well beyond that.
It always depends when you die.
It depends when I leave. But yeah, I'm going to be 50 this year. And I just had this kind of soul awakening that I just wanted to do more and just be more authentic to who I am and what drives me as a person. And I do have a very interesting story.
I want to hear
that's
it.
gotten me here.
And it's interesting. Let's start there with the midway point. It was Dante in the Inferno who said, midway through life, I found myself lost in the dark woods.
Yeah.
Right. And most men go through a dark wood period of their life. And, in our conversations, a brief, but nonetheless, I felt you had gone through some dark wood period and reimagining yourself in those woods. Does that resonate?
Absolutely. And, I've been through many dark wood periods in my life, even from, going back to childhood. And each subsequent time, I've been able to lean on some of those experiences and lessons learned, sometimes really hard lessons from those previous periods. And I suspect as I continue on this journey that will continue as well.
My teacher, mentor, Viktor Frankl, author of Man's Search for Meaning, father of logotherapy, really talks about that there are 3 primary ways to discover meaning. You can find it in creation, the things we create. You can find it in experience, the things that we experience, obviously, and then you can find it in suffering. And he said this out of the Holocaust. And that dark woods is a suffering, but in my experience, and I'd like to hear yours, it's meaningful. It's not gratuitous. It's not for nothing. If you're willing to look at it that way.
Yeah, well, I 100% agree, and that certainly has been my experience. My most recent dark wood period was just the disillusionment with the systems I was in, namely the workplace. I worked in the mental health and substance use treatment industry for the last 3 or 4 years. And I just started to notice that in a field or an industry where mental health is the goal, I was seeing a lot of really bad or poor mental health outcomes among the people who work in that industry. And that struck me as both ironic and somewhat shameful.
Meaning the providers, practitioners were struggling with their mental health.
Yes, and I started to look for why that might be and ask myself the question, what is going on here? And kind of follow the path of thought that perhaps it's the greater systems, the cultures around us, understanding how much those impact us in terms of our own identity and feelings of value and meaning and worth, and wondering if those systems might not be the healthiest. And what is our place as individuals? At the Slog Co, we really want to move away from this individualistic model of mental health treatment, which is to say, something's wrong with you, the individual. You're broken. You need to go out and fix yourself, and then come back and be a great cultural fit, a team player. we question that. And I don't think my partner and I, Dustin, he's a licensed clinical social worker. He's got 20 plus years of therapy experience. We don't really buy that explanation. And we want to challenge that and push back on that to say that perhaps it is the systems that need some fixing.
Wow. And not only did you say that, you're doing something about it.
We certainly are.
It's easy to say something. It's harder to do something.
Correct. Having been lost in those woods, we have a metaphor we always use. So the first I'll define the slog. The slog is generally defined as hard, steady work in a determined way over a long period of time. And that's kind of how we view this man's quest for meaning and worth and purpose. But it's also about understanding ourselves and the systems around us and how those systems impact us and how they form our identity. And the story we often tell is about a children's book called Going on a Bear Hunt. And in this book,
there's a song too, wasn't it?
I believe so. Yeah. It's the whole purpose of the story is to explain how, if you're on a bear hunt and you encounter a river or a deep forest, you can't go over it, you can't go under it, you have to go through it.
Right.
And we look at the slog, this experience we're all living, this struggle that we all face as a slog. And we think the only way out of it is to go through it. And it's hard work, but it's meaningful work to us because we, as I said, Dustin and I have both had to go through many dark wood periods. And taking some of those lessons and sharing those with others, and really not even proposing answers or quick fixes, but it's more about holding up a mirror both to ourselves and to others to help light the way.
Love it. You're helping people reframe the slog. I think what I hear is you're helping them reframe it so that you're not finding meaning or growing or whatever in spite of it, but because of it.
Yes.
Right. And
Absolutely.
that changes the slog. I call it, sometimes I call it avoidance, a void dance, a dance around the void.
Yeah.
People dance around and around and around and around. And, they just keep moving, keep doing, keep whatever. Sometimes, not sometimes, all the times, eventually you just got to go into the void. You got to go through it. You got to go through the slog.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the message that we're promoting. So speaking of dark woods experiences, Dustin and I actually met over 20 years ago in the military. We both served in the Army. We were in the infantry, and we met in Germany. We got deployed to Iraq and served an entire year in combat. And I will tell you, as far as deep, dark woods go, war is about the deepest, darkest wood that I can fathom. And having gone through that experience, that trauma, the grief, the loss, just the moral injury that war and combat can produce, required us to be in it. There's no avoiding it. We were deployed. We were there. We had to be there. And that has been a catalyst for us for every subsequent time we've encountered challenges in life, to look at what we had to do to survive that experience, but also after. And I was listening to one of your previous episodes where you were talking about, it's not so much about change, it's about remembering, reawakening, or perhaps even reconnecting with that truest, most authentic part of ourselves. And that's what we're trying to do. That's really important work, we think, not only for ourselves, but for our culture in general.
Yeah, we live in this culture, society that talks a lot about, becoming. Right? There's a striving nature to the West, and it builds hospitals and does good things. But then I see the men that I coach, and it never ends. It's always about becoming. It's never being. Right? And I really like this idea. I draw it from Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, of returning. Right? We're returning to our true self. All the other bullshit, our layers that we've added, that's versions and variations of me. But the true me is in there. It's always been in there.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a process of returning. I think that's what you're sort of talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And framing it in a way that takes into account that as humans, we're really good storytellers. We use language to analyze and describe our experience. And sometimes as storytellers, we can be wrong. And a lot of times those stories that we're telling ourselves and each other are inherited
Mm-hmm.
from our systems. They're repeated. So we get stuck in that narrative. And I think what we're saying, and what I love about the Man Uprising project that you're working on, is that it is about saying you have the power and the opportunity to keep that pen in your hand and keep writing. You're never at an end. The slog never ends. Becoming never ends. It's about being, going through it.
Well, I remiss that I didn't say thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you.
I honor I honor vets like everybody should. You put your life on the line. You gave up so much, and it doesn't just end. I've worked with enough vets to know it doesn't just end the day your duty's up.
Right.
Right. In some ways, that's when it just begins.
Yeah.
So, thank you for all that you sacrificed and for the slog that you went through.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's really why we're doing what we're doing. In many ways, we had to learn to become human again. War is such a dehumanizing experience.
Yeah.
Learning to become human again and transition back into a life beyond the military, I'm still going through that process, and I suspect I always will. But that was much of where our slog project kind of had its beginnings, was us going through that process together and helping each other get through that.
I just rewatched the movie American Sniper with Kyle. I forgot his name. Something Kyle. Anyways, you see the price a warrior pays for being in that mode, and then coming back to a society, that doesn't even know a war is going on, and asking that man to flip a switch. Right? To leave the warrior behind and be the lover, be all these other roles that are important. It just hit me so hard. What a tall order, and if not impossible, and it oftentimes, too often, results in devastating consequences. Could be. I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. You've spent your life in this world, but addictions and numbing agents and suicide. Every 15 minutes in this country, a man takes his own life. And I think the same statistic is true, or pretty close, something around veterans. They're disproportionately higher likelihood of suicide than the general population. So they pay a heavy price, and we got to do a better job of helping them transition.
Absolutely. And this goes back then to that collective idea that it takes all of us. Our cultures help shape who we are just as much as we contribute to building our cultures. And so it's a two-way street. And I love that you said that. One of the things I remember when I got home from the war was observing this general sense of apathy toward what was going on. And for me, it wasn't about the politics or the geopolitical implications. For me, it was about the real cost, the cost you just described, to the human beings who were affected by it, whether they were soldiers, civilians, family members, whomever. War is a very traumatizing thing, and it's obviously very damaging, and it's full of trauma and grief and loss, and just it's about the most inhumane thing humans can do. But again, I think that's where I learned to accept that, right, and just understand people might be apathetic because they just don't understand. Yeah. They don't have the bandwidth, the attention span for it. And where I might have been a little bit bitter and resentful toward that, I kind of learned to turn that into something a bit more constructive, which is to say, it's not because they don't want to know. It's that that's not their experience.
They don't know what they don't know.
So how do I share my experience with them so that apathy turns more toward empathy?
To change the system.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So I'm Israeli and American, and there's almost no suicide by vets in Israel. I mean, it happens, but it's no different, certainly, than the national average, which is lower than America. And one of the reasons, a friend of mine told me, I didn't serve. I grew up here and ended up over there, and the point where they basically said to me, "You're too fat and old. If we need you, we have bigger problems." So, but my friends served, and he said to me, at least this was his theory, and it makes sense to me. They never have fought a war in Israel where somebody in the battalion hasn't been able to see their village, their home, their city. They know what they're fighting for, and the people whom they're fighting for know they're out there fighting. And so that system is just a different environment, right? I've never known really what to do with that other than to know it's possible to instill in the people that you're protecting a sense of appreciation if they know.
Yeah.
And what you're doing is to help them know what they don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. To name it. Say it out loud. Because it is real. As much as a lot of people, I think, would like it not to be. And I love that story. I think that connectedness, that shared sense of purpose might be why that system is a little more supportive of people than, say, the American system.
And also, not this is a military whatever comparison conversation, because I don't know shit, but I do know that in Israel everybody has to serve, right? And that changes the game when it's not just a certain segment of our population or a small percentage of our population. And that's one of the things that Viktor Frankl preached in logotherapy. He actually got into arguments with Abraham Maslow. They were contemporaries. And Maslow was a big proponent of his pyramid.
Right. The hierarchy of needs.
The hierarchy of needs. And all these fundamentals, and nobody's going to argue with it. But Frankl argued the top. Remember, the top of it is self-actualization. And Frankl said it can't be. The only way you can actualize yourself, to live that true person that's in there, is to go beyond yourself. He said it has to be self-transcendence, right? And that always struck me as just true. I'm the best version of myself when I'm going beyond myself.
Yeah.
And that's the power of service in the military. I imagine, again, only having witnessed it.
Oh, absolutely. The service to something greater than oneself is a core fundamental of military service.
Yeah. And it's missing in our culture. That's my point, is we need to bring that ethos to our culture, to the system, self-transcendence, right? Something bigger than yourself. I know in your podcast, you do talk about faith. You talk about something bigger, right? You're not just sort of boxed in these secular, narrow prisms. I know that you and Dustin are open to, I think I've heard every conversation under the sun on your podcast. So it's really refreshing to see that you're bringing that also to a world business that doesn't usually think in those terms.
Yeah, no, and it's, again, the collective nature of things. As humans, we're social creatures, right? We kind of rely on each other for a lot of things. And I think the same thing goes with mental health. One thing that Dustin has shared with me that over the years he's learned by thousands and thousands of hours in individual and group therapy settings is just being able to see that most of the time we as humans have a really tough time seeing our own shit. We just can't see it.
Or won't see it.
Right.
Won't see it, but yeah.
And we need people outside of ourselves. That this is where we get into that transcendent idea. Yeah. We need people to call us out and say it. I think you've called it not a safe space, but a brave space. We need that. We need to be able to help each other see our blind spots so we can start fixing them.
So I have a couple military vets, one's a general, in different man uprising groups. And they said this, maybe not man uprising, but peer groups, this kind of concept, which I know you have your versions of it. This is what's missing in the transition process for vets coming back, right? Because, and it's brave space, it's structured space. Like it's very regimented. My previous podcast, I talked with my co-founder, Dave Mann, and we talked about one of the game changers for Man Uprising is it's not a sewing circle. It isn't just like happenstance, and you don't just talk about whatever you want. Like there's a process to go through, and that structure is replacing, this general said, the structure that these men once had in their peer groups in their military service. And now what we're doing is we're taking that same idea of structure, but inside that structure, it's a brave space to start getting into the things that he said in 30 years of service, he never once had a conversation like this, right? A conversation about your heart. about the lover, about all these things
Yeah.
that I imagine you grappled with when you came back.
Yeah, definitely. I can speak for myself and many other veterans that I've worked with and have known over the years. That loss of collective shared mission,
Mm-hmm.
that camaraderie, is a tremendous loss. And a lot of people I know, myself included, grieved that loss just as much as they grieved the loss of friends who actually died,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not there for us anymore. We've lost that structure. We've lost our battle buddies to our left and our right, being real with us in those moments, and replacing that isn't easy, especially in a society and a culture that maybe doesn't understand, and doesn't know the words to say, and doesn't know how to create those spaces for us to have that. And some of the best outcomes I've seen from veterans who've successfully transitioned or are doing so successfully are because they have a great support network around them. So again, it goes back to that social element that we need as humans. Really powerful stuff.
Really powerful stuff. And, you said a society that doesn't maybe allow for it or understand it, but I would say that penalizes you. The guys I talk to, they're out hunting in life,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a zero-sum game, right? They're a sales guy. They're competing against the other sales guy on the same team, right? And so there's this scarcity mindset, get mine.
Yeah.
And then you start armoring up and you start posturing, and it's the big dick contest, it's the locker room shit.
Mm-hmm.
And so we almost reward that because these are the highest paying jobs, and vulnerability is perceived as not setting you up for success in those spaces. So we actually have to go against that because it's not set up for this kind of conversation.
Yeah, it's not. And that's certainly where I found myself most recently in the professional realm.
And you were in the mental health space.
In the mental health space, and still dealing with the same stuff.
Man, that's fucked up.
It is. There's no other way to say it. And that for me was just a trigger that I've got to try to do something. And Dustin's obviously been through quite a bit of it himself as a therapist, seeing it, hearing it. And we just got to the point where we have to say something. We have to start normalizing honesty and vulnerability. And of course, most importantly, authenticity, being true to ourselves and to each other.
Amazing. Have you run into much opposition around this?
Opposition, no, I wouldn't characterize it as opposition. I think there's been some resistance because we are trying to affect some type of change or reconnection or however you want to describe it. And humans tend to not want to change or not want to be vulnerable. And that, I think, a lot of times is just to protect the identity. There's a feeling of safety and security we get from being certain that we're right, that the identity we've created is good. There's that competitive element to it as well. And I think all we're trying to say is we can do better, and we need to do it together.
So in Hebrew, we have a word called tachlis, which I guess would translate to brass tacks.
Okay.
Right? Like, how does that happen in the work that you're doing at Slog Co? How does that happen? How do you see that happening?
Well, I think one is having the courage to say it, to call it out, and that's what we're doing. And when we have encountered opposition or resistance, it's mainly been focused on the fact that we've said stuff that makes people uncomfortable. And we're okay with that, because in my moments of growth, as I look back on my life, those have always come from periods of discomfort. Growth rarely comes from being comfortable, right? If everything's fine, why do I need to do anything?
A teacher of mine once said, nobody writes good poetry sitting on a couch in the suburbs, air conditioned in the 21st century.
Yeah,
right.
That's it. So calling it out, right? But then also having the humility. I think humility is a big part of it too. We have to be okay recognizing that the story we've told ourselves or the identity that we've fashioned about ourselves, that it's okay to alter that, to let that evolve and adapt and become more whole. And I think that's tough for a lot of people, myself included. I struggle with that just as much as anyone, I think. But as we've been having our conversations on the podcast, Dustin and I challenge each other frequently, online and offline, and have done so for years. And I've experienced tremendous growth because of that.
Mm.
And I really want our whole world to have that, really.
It's not just an echo chamber where you
Right.
surround yourself with people who already validate and agree with you, which
Mhm.
I've seen so much in the political realm. It's like nauseating. I know, I'm kind of in the middle of two worlds. I come from Nebraska. All my friends are evangelical Christians. It's not hard to guess who they voted for. And
Yeah.
then, I'm a Jew. Most of the people I know who are Jewish, almost all of them are liberals. Not hard to guess who they voted for.
Right.
The funny thing, the tragic thing was that I talked to my friends from Nebraska, and they're like, we've never met somebody who's voted for, who's going to vote for Harris. And I talked to the Jewish people, we've never really met, or we certainly don't hang out with, I guess is more honest, people who are going to vote for the other person.
Mhm.
It's like, you have nobody in your life? They don't, like legitimately. It's an echo chamber.
Yeah.
And then we need to challenge those echo chambers.
I think so. Because as you're writing that story within your own little bubble, ask yourself the question, is this story accurate?
Mm-hmm.
Do I have all the facts? Right? Do I have other perspectives and diverse ideas and insights? Probably not. And that can be very limiting in terms of how we're building our own identities and, again, how we're going through this world together.
Yeah, as always said, this shit doesn't fit on a bumper sticker.
Right.
Like, I love, I'm a challenger, Enneagram. That's a personality type. I am a challenger.
Yeah.
So I like to disrupt shit,
Yeah.
which was really useful as a rabbi. But I always challenge my friends who are evangelical who say abortion is prohibited. And, it's nuanced, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying I agree with pro-life or pro-choice. It's fucking complicated.
Yeah.
There are scenarios where if a mother's life is in danger, according to Jewish law, you must save the mother's life.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's the only use of abortion, but you then can't say absolute. Or I remember I was counseling somebody years ago as a rabbi, and they came to me, they were in a quandary because they fell in love with another woman, but their spouse had been in a coma for 5 years at that point or
Mm-hmm.
something, and he didn't want to divorce her to be with this other woman. I felt more wrong to him than just to have companionship. And I gave him a blessing. Of course, it's a commandment, right? Adultery still is out, but it was a nuanced conversation that had to be had. So this shit doesn't fit on a bumper sticker.
No, it doesn't. And I think, you hit on a great point. Humans, it seems to me, seem to prefer and favor black and white answers, right? This binary kind of way of looking at things, and that life was that simple, right? That things weren't so complicated. But then you ask yourself, well, how, as a society, American society in particular, how do we become so polarized? Well, to me, it makes sense that if we're always looking for the simple answer, right, shunning nuance in favor of the simple answer, of course we can be pulled to the extremes much easier.
Yeah.
Because it just feels less of a burden to do so.
Yeah.
And the slog that we're promoting is kind of saying the opposite. You got to do it. Mm-hmm. The hard stuff. It sucks. It's not fun, but you don't have to do it alone. And that's why that collective element is so important to us.
So there's the collective element. There's naming the thing. You can't name it, you can't tame it. So you're helping put attention and light on this. What other the brass tacks things that the Slog Co is doing?
There are several, but the one I'd really want to focus on today and say as loudly and proudly as I can is you have to want it, right? There's experts, there's people with millions of letters behind their name out there that have all the answers or proposed answers. And they might be right in a lot of cases, but unless we as individuals actually want to undergo that awakening and that change, it's not going to happen.
Totally.
You have to want it. And I think for me, that's been the biggest struggle of my life, right? For years, so I grew up in an evangelical home and community in Oklahoma.
Heard drums were forbidden.
That's right. Drums were from the devil. And that was a very limiting, restrictive type of upbringing. And it was difficult to get out of it. When I joined the military, I escaped that system or that bubble. enough that I felt like I had permission to start thinking for myself and developing my own ideas, opinions, and thoughts. But I still didn't necessarily want to, right? And I think it was having gone through combat and just being basically put to my lowest point ever, rock bottom, right? I found the bottom for me. That's when I went from just recognizing that I had permission to think outside of my upbringing and to continue writing my narrative, but to actually want it. And I think it was just out of sheer desperation. I didn't know any other way to reclaim my humanity. And so that's what compelled me to say, okay, I want to do this. I want to get into the slog because it's the only way I can move beyond this.
And I would just challenge that back to my nature, and I would just nuance it. And what I hear at least, you tell me, is not that I want to do this. I need to do this, right? Because a need is not optional. It's not negotiable. I need oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a choice. And you get to this point in life where, as Plato, necessity is the mother of invention.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a choice, right? And that's, I see men who come to me, sometimes they're sent by their wives. I'm like, nope, come back when you want to be here, because it never fucking works.
Yeah.
You don't want it, your wife wants it. And that's part of the problem. And you come back when you have necessity, and we'll invent something.
Well, I love that. I love that you kind of differentiated want versus need there, because I think you're right. And I think that's what we're trying to do with our work, is help people identify the need regardless of where they are. You don't have to be in Baghdad, Iraq, getting shot at and blown up and miserable for a whole year watching your friends die to see the need. And if we can help illuminate or shine a light on this need we have as a culture for people so that they don't have to reach rock bottom, well, that would be ideal, right? We don't want to see people suffer to get to that point. Some people do need to get there. I needed to get there in order to see that need. But we're trying to use our experiences and the things we've learned along the way to help others not have to go.
It's called wisdom.
Is that what they call it?
To not have to do the thing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not saying you or I are wise, because I'm still slogging through the shit.
I know. I hear my dad saying something like, the reason I'm telling you this and being hard on you is so, you don't have to learn the hard way. And I used to roll my eyes at that and kind of smirk at it. But when I think about it, there is wisdom in that. And that perhaps that's what wisdom is trying to light people's paths through the darkness.
Well, you said a lot of amazing things, one of which is the way you're reframing the slog as important, not as only something to get through, but something to go through. I think of, did you ever read Seth Godin's book, The Dip?
I haven't.
It's a very small book. It's worthy. He's actually just picking up on a principle in physics and everywhere, is that tension is necessary, right? That pushing through that opposition. And he calls it the dip because it's built into everything. And if it wasn't there would just be, everybody would be doing everything all the time. It's there to weed out sincerity. So if you want to play the violin, it's fun until it's not. And most people quit. But the greats push through the dip.
Yeah.
Right? And then they get to the other side and they're virtuosos. But then there's another dip they got to push through to level up. And so instead of looking at the dip as a negative, you start looking at it as a positive.
Yeah. I think that's a healthy way to look at that. And I'll certainly be adding that book to my reading list.
Another one is The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield.
That one I've read.
I love him.
Multiple times.
He was a congregant of mine in Los Angeles for a period of time. A remarkable man. He's got a lot of great books. But tell me why your eyes lit up around that.
So The War of Art, Pressfield takes on the big bad elephant in the room, which is resistance. Resistance is all the things we do, the stories we tell, the excuses we make to avoid living our true purpose. And I still struggle with the resistance every day. It kicks my ass multiple times a day. So often I will just go back and reread the book to remind myself, give myself that slap that you're resisting. All the things you're telling yourself it's bullshit. You're just trying to like get away from what you know in your heart is what you're here to be doing. And fortunately, I read it toward the end of last year as I was going through a dark period in my career. I was in a very toxic workplace environment. You know, a lot of micromanagement, mistrust, just all the bad things. And I picked that book up and read it in one night. And it's a short book. And I had myself a little conversation with my resistance and said, you know what, when this new year turns over, I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to leave. And I'm going to start pursuing my purpose, my true purpose, listening to my muse, as Pressfield characterizes it. And here I am.
Wow.
So I'm on a path in some way. But yeah, I love that book.
Yeah, he really does an amazing job of reframing something that we have just thought in a totally different way, that, you know, resistance doesn't just happen. More often than not, I'm creating it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then I'm telling myself, well, I'm running into resistance, when in fact I'm actually generating the resistance and getting nowhere because of it. Yeah. So really profound book. So so I just want to, you know, come back to, and we can start wrapping it up here, but so I and our listeners can fully understand Slog Co. So you're potentially going into businesses, organizations. Is that part of the business model?
It is. In fact, we're super open right now to seeing where this thing goes. I guess taking on as many different fires, if you will, as we can, and seeing where we're needed. So we do have our podcast, the Slog Pod, where we're taking on a lot of these cultural and systems-based issues. We're also certainly open to working with organizations, companies, any type of system, large or small, even if it's a family. Mm-hmm. We have some curriculum we're working on in terms of like a workbook or mirror type resources to help people kind of start seeing this stuff. And just, again, it's not coming from a place that we have all the answers. In fact, we say very clearly we don't have all the answers. But we're here to ask the questions that matter. We're here to help people hold that mirror up to themselves and start asking themselves and those around them those questions. And however that takes us in terms of a business venture goes, we're kind of at the mercy right now of our muses. We're just following our passion. One way folks can support us is just by listening to our podcast, commenting, sending us their thoughts, insights, stories, things that we can riff on and start working on these things together. We really want to create a collective or a community where people can do that, because I just don't think there are enough of those spaces for people.
Absolutely.
That's a huge part of our mission, and whether we ever make money off of it or not, we feel really good about what we're doing for right now, and we'll do it for as long as we can afford to, or afford not to.
Well, you know, at that point, the muse will take you in the direction you're supposed to go. I've never met a man who's followed a muse and lived to regret it. Now, I've met many men who thought they were following a muse when they were actually following the siren, which is the opposite of a muse. She takes you out to sea and crashes you against the rocks. Yeah. And it's interesting, these ancient paradigms of this divine feminine, this attraction. Mm-hmm. One is seductive and dangerous, and one is attractive and liberating, right? And it's a fine line. One man's muse might be another man's siren. That's right. But that's why you got to do the work. Yeah, figure out what's the call, and there's so many ways that I know we're going to partner together. One of which is to help men who are going through the slog have structured support, right? And especially veterans. Like, I really want Man Uprising to have an arm that is supportive and outreach to veterans in that community. Mm-hmm. So we've talked about it before, but I think that's really an area of clear collaboration.
Absolutely. And I've participated in one of, is it the UpX experience? Yeah. And I loved that structure. I took a lot of value out of that time we spent together, that small group of men, having these real, honest, and kind of raw conversations, but in a structured way.
Yeah.
I think that structure was important. And I think for folks who served in the military, guys, if you're out there and you're hurting and you're feeling isolated and alone, finding a peer group like Man Uprising where you have that structure and that brave space to start uncovering that true you, and drawing on others' experiences to get there, is just massively helpful, and would encourage everyone out there who's struggling to look for something like that.
Yeah, I see a lot of, manosphere crap out there, this sort of, they call toxic masculinity, which I would just say is like, there's no such thing. That's like saying toxic love is not love. Toxic masculinity is not masculinity. And it's a siren taking men further out, away from their heart, away from the vulnerability. And one of the things I love about Man Uprising, and you're an embodiment of this, is we attract a lot of warriors who are also lovers.
Yeah.
And they can't have one without the other, right? You need that warrior strength to stand up for what's right, to be able to protect yourself, yours, your country when called upon, but then to be able to transition like, that we talked about with American Sniper, back to the lover when it's time to be the lover. And getting to know you and just being in your presence, I know you have access to both of those.
Yeah, definitely.
Very profound. So, I'm Israeli, and we have what's called chutzpah, chutzpah. And so, you ready to commit to a Man Uprising group?
Tell you what, if the Slog Co really takes off, yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate the work you're doing, truly. And I've been sending a few folks your way. Hopefully they've reached out, and I'll continue to do so and support your work. And definitely look forward to continuing to have our conversations and collaborate. Who knows, maybe we can get you on the Slog Co one of these days coming up.
Love it. Well, big things ahead for Slog Co and the Slog Pod. And I hope my millions of viewers go check it out.
Yeah. So we have a joke. We call our audience our tens of viewers. We're trying to grow that. Special thanks to Let's Do Podcast for hosting us today. This is a great studio, and I've really appreciated the great lights and everything. This has been a good experience for me.
Well, it's a pleasure having you, and keep on keeping on, slogging through the slog.
That's right.
All right, brother.
We'll slog through it. Thanks.
Thank you.